How are you guys on this glorious and wonderful day? It has been great. I actually just woke up. I woke up and I did my hair as much as you can with it being less than an inch long, and then you know made my beard butter all throughout my beard and got that looking all right and had it laid down. And so I'm looking fresh right now. That's what I'm trying to say. You guys are seeing me as I wake up, yes, and so I might still be a little bit baggy under the eyes and all that, but that's okay. God will get me through. I had a good night's rest. It was nice. It was peaceful. I don't even remember what I dreamt, but I guess that's not really that relevant. But yeah, I hope you guys are having a great day. I say all that to say I hope you guys are having a great day. Whenever you find yourself watching this, maybe you're watching it before you go to bed. You're in the complete opposite circumstance of me. I don't know. But whatever and however you find yourself, I'm just so glad that you listen to this. And then for me in the future, because if you guys didn't know, eventually I'll be watching this for myself later on. So for me in the future, I would just like to say, hey, how you doing? It's kind of weird that I'm talking to myself. I almost said you, but you is me. And so that would have gotten really confusing. Anyway, I just wanted to start out this time by thanking God. Just giving a little bit of praise, giving a little bit of glory to God, because I'm just so glad that when I seek Him, He gives me a return on my time. He gives me a return on what I put to Him. God gives me purpose. And so when I give Him my purpose, He is able to turn something out of it. He is able to make something out of it. God is able to make something out of what you give Him. And I am so glad that our God is a God who makes things. That our God is a God who does things where He doesn't need any validation. God doesn't need us, but yet He needs us. He doesn't need us, but He needs us. And He can accomplish everything that is His goal and what He's planned to do without us. However, He needs us because we can play a specific role. We don't have to play that role, but we can play a very specific role that nobody else can. He needs us to fill that role. He needs us because you're the only one to do it. So when you put yourself in and you give yourself to God, just know that it is a good investment. Just know that it is a good, it's a good way to spend your time, spend your resources, because God will give you a return on what you give to Him. And so I just want to lift God up this morning. I want to give Him a little bit of praise. You guys can give Him a little bit of praise wherever you find yourself right now. But I'm going to go into that a little bit further. But before I do that, let me lead us in a time of prayer. God, I'm just so thankful for You. I'm thankful for You being the type of God who can give us a return on something that we could never do ourselves. God, I'm so thankful that You are good and that You are trustworthy with what we give You. God, I'm so thankful that I even have the opportunity to give something to You. And God, I would just like to say, just during this time, allow my words to be Your words, and allow my thoughts to be Your thoughts as I communicate the message that You have given me. And God, I'm just so thankful for this opportunity. I'm so thankful for the people who are watching it. I'm so thankful for their willingness and their support behind me. God, I just ask that You come into this space and that You lead this time. In Your holy name we pray. Amen. Amen. So if you guys want to flip to what I'm going to be reading from today, you can. I'm gonna give it a little bit of context, but I'll be reading from Ecclesiastes 7. But just to preface it with some context, really of the message, not necessarily of the exact passage, but some context behind what I'll be talking about today. So, I have been surprised how much business, right? Like the business college at the school that I go to, I'm surprised at how much business has given me a perspective on who God is. I have, right here. There was a quote, right? I've had to take down multiple quotes from my economics teachers because he just says some profound stuff and like just shrugs it off like it's nothing. You ready for this? I wrote it down because it was just so good. Ask yourself why the question is being asked. When you figure out why the question is being asked, the answer is simple. That's so profound. You can't, and he was talking about this about an economics test. An economics test of all things, right? You would expect this quote to be like from some philosophical genius. No, it's from an economics class about a test. But what God has been teaching me is that I learn so much about Him when all I do is listen. We don't have to necessarily be in the context of a Bible study. I don't have to be in the context of church. I don't have to be around a whole lot of other people who are devoutly believing and following in God. And while all those things are great, and I think that they're all necessary, I learned that. And that statement applies to my relationship with God. It applies to my perspective with God. And I learned that from my economics teacher. And that's just one quote. I'm telling you, man, this dude is a gold mine, okay? He's got so much good stuff, it's not even funny. Like, he says so many things that just make you go like, whoa. But I'm sure that I'm probably the only person in that class who's thinking like that. Who when he says, when you ask yourself why the question is being asked and learn why the question is being asked, then the answer is simple. I'm sure that I'm the only person who's like, whoa, that teaches me so much about God. I'm not trying to put myself above other people or discredit other people. I'm just saying, my perspective of that class. I go to that class, yes, to learn economics, but just based on what I've learned outside of the context of economics so far, every single class, I go in there learning how can I apply this to my relationship with God. Because as you guys have seen before, I did a message a couple messages ago where I did a whole entire example about supply and demand curves. And I talked about the artificial ceiling that we put on ourselves. And it's funny because a ceiling in the economics curve is below the potential, right? And so the floor is actually above the potential. And so I compared them. That class has taught me so much as far as my relationship to God, and then also how the enemy will use the things to fight against God. So even if you find it, maybe you can take from this, even if you find yourself in a horrible class, figure out a way to apply it to God. maybe that's how you get through that class. Now, I personally love economics. It's really cool. It's really interesting. There's a lot of concepts and whatnot. I'm a very conceptual person. I figured out recently that I love psychological answers to questions, apparently. I love the concept around how people interact, around how people communicate, around how people think. Economics is about how people spend money, right? And so that class, right? I go into that class with a willingness and an open-mindedness to learn something about God, even though it's not from a preacher, even though it's not from the Bible, because the principle that he's saying, even though it doesn't have the same context, the principle of when I ask myself, why is something happening? It can apply to more than just that. And so I'm using that as a jumping board to get into what I actually want to talk about, because business has also introduced me to a couple different kinds of investments. And investments have a return. Okay? And so the most common form of a return on an investment is interest, right? So let's say that you have $100,000 and you invest it. Maybe your investment is by giving it away, or maybe your investment is into the stock market. You're paid dividends, you're paid interest. It's all an accumulated sum of money that is added on top of what the value of what you put in actually is. It all revolves around the statement of interest, right? So maybe I give you $100,000. I wish I had $100,000 to give, but let's say that I give somebody $100,000, and maybe when they pay it back to me, then they have to pay $110,000, and so now I'm making a $10,000 return on my investment, right? There's always a return on your investment. That's the principle I'm trying to draw out. But there's a couple different kinds of interest, right? And so we have to be cautious of and knowledgeable of the interest that we're getting back. Some interest is called straight line interest. That means that, let's say that you get $100,000 and you loan it out for 5 years, and each year, let's just say that you would get $10,000, right? On straight line interest, that $10,000 doesn't grow, right? You're getting $10,000 on that $100,000 each year. That's straight line. Now, the next kind of interest that you can use is called compound interest. And compound interest is probably the most common form of interest among common, everyday stuff, where it's kind of like when you put money into a bank account or like a savings account. And so you put your $100,000 there, and let's say that at the end of the year you get $105,000, right? Because you got the $5,000 in the interest rate. Well, the next year they won't count it as $100,000; they'll count it as $105,000. So now you're earning interest on the interest that you've gained, right? It's compound. It's called compound because interest grows interest. And so with compound interest, especially at first, it takes a really, really long time. They have a thing called the rule of 72, and it's the amount of time. It's a way to guesstimate at a certain percentage how quickly something will double, right? So you take 72 and divide it by the interest rate, and then that's how long it will take to double. But once it doubles, that growth rate's going to skyrocket, because now you're earning twice as much as you were on the first years lining up to that. It's kind of like an exponential growth, right? Slow at the beginning, but then skyrockets later. And so, while I think a lot of us, if we're being honest, we would like to have a compound interest when it comes to God, right? We want to put in our work and not get too much, not get too far ahead of ourselves, but then when we're ready, we want it all. You know what I'm saying? We want to build and we want to grow, and we want to handle stuff as we do, and then slightly grow, but then out of nowhere you hit that axis point, and straight up from there. That's what we want. However, I found personally, and now maybe this is because I'm young, maybe it's because I'm naive, maybe it's because I haven't spent too many years on this earth, or too many years in the passion that I have, and too many years in the purpose that I believe is upon my life, and maybe I haven't spent too many years in my calling, but this is what I want to share with you guys. I think that my interest, right, my investment with God works more like a mortgage. In a mortgage, they have, let's say we've been using $100,000. $100,000 would be a great price for a house. Like a great price, assuming that the house is nice. So let's say that you got $100,000, right, and then you're on a 30-year mortgage. the way that a mortgage works is that the normal mortgage is that you're paying off more interest than house for the first 15 years. And then once the 15 years hits, then it kind of switches. So there's a percentage. So let's say that the first year you're paying 90% interest, 10% house. Next year is 85% interest, 15% house. And then 80-20, and then 75-25. I think you guys get the trend, right? But when that happens, let's say that you need to refinance your mortgage. Well, you've only paid off a little bit of the house, but you've paid a lot of interest. So a whole lot of your money has been going to the wrong thing. Or not necessarily the wrong thing, but it's been going to the interest. It's essentially the opposite of a compound interest, right? And I shouldn't have said wrong thing, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It might not help our wallets if we wanted to refinance, but of course that's where this analogy falls short. But, so compound interest skyrockets. A mortgage plateaus, right? You're paying off the majority of the interest in those first 15 years, right? Let's say that arbitrarily, it's right there. So your space of interest is much higher the first 15 years than it is the next 15. And that's because you're paying off a majority of the interest in the first 15 years because it works on the percentage system. I think that a lot of times represents our growth with God. We first start following God, right? We first start, I'm going to switch colors just for the sake of it. We first start following God and we see growth. We see change. We see a whole lot of things going right. We're all headed in the right direction. And then it starts to slow. And then we start learning Bible verses and we've got a couple down. And then we start to feel like we plateau. It feels like in order to grow, growing isn't as easy as it used to be. Growing isn't as easy when I didn't know anything, so I had everything to know. Growing isn't as easy when it takes a lot more time to get a little bit more. And I think a lot of us have this view towards God. I know a lot of the times I'll get discouraged because when I first started to make sermons, I had such a passion for it because I saw the growth week to week. Week to week. My first sermon was garbage. Well, I mean, it wasn't that bad. I liked the topic, but I didn't do that great of a job. Right? And so, but then the next week, my first message was called Standing Across from Your Blessing. My second was called Just As Over Because. Right? Just as over because. I saw that movement, right? I started here, started from the bottom. I love Drake. Started here. The only way to move is up. And I did. And so then, I kept moving up, week to week. And then now I get to a point where I'm not trying to say that I've plateaued. I'm not trying to say that I am the best preacher in the world or the best version of the preacher that I'm called to be. I'm just telling you, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing week to week. I'm not seeing a jolt in my ability, right? I'm not seeing a jolt in my ability to communicate. It's slower. Growth is still happening, but it's slower. It takes more of my investment to get more of a return or to get the same level of return as before. It takes more of me. Maybe it takes more time. Maybe it takes more thought. Maybe it takes more planning. It takes more to get the same level of a return as before. And that's because I think that a lot of times we have this view, this mortgage view about our relationship with God. And so I want to use that as a jumping board. I've been talking for 20 minutes already. Well, 5 minutes introduction and then 15 minutes actually introducing the sermon. But I want to talk for a little bit about Ecclesiastes 7 and how, because all what I've been explaining, right? If you guys zoned out, okay, I get it. But what you really need to hear is the investment. It's the investment. What you invest will make a return. And so I was laying out the different ways that we can experience investments and the different way that we can experience the return on our investments. And so I'm going to use Ecclesiastes 7, specifically verses 23 through 25, to talk about this a little bit more. Text says, "All this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me." Now, all this, he says, all this, Solomon says, all this. What is all this? Well, all this is referring to everything that he has talked about leading up to where we find ourselves in Ecclesiastes 9. So I'll just give you a brief overview. A good name is better than a precious ointment. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness. Better is the end of a thing than a beginning of a thing. Say not, why were these former days better than these days? Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. Just a couple things. Go ahead and read it. If you really are worried about me taking this out of context, go ahead and read it. I promise it's not. But there's so much wisdom in what he has to say. And like he said, all this I have tested by wisdom. All this I have tested by wisdom. I'll just stop there real quick. All this I have tested by wisdom. There's a test when you invest. I know I'm sounding like a real basic Southern Baptist preacher now, aren't I? There's a test when you invest. Let me tell you, there's a test for when you invest. Yes. All right, that's enough of that. There's a test for your investment. There's a test. There's a test when you invest. Because I don't think that you're this way, and I don't think that I'm this way. I don't think that I would blindly put my investment into something that I know isn't going to get the return that I want to. And I hope that you are the same way, in the sense that I hope that you evaluate what your investment will bring you. And you might not have all the answers. You might say, well, if I take this step, going back to last week with apathy, a step. The step might not, you might not know the outcomes, but you can judge the outcomes of it. If you're taking a step out of wisdom, expect wisdom back. If you take a step away from wisdom, expect other things than wisdom. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to test necessarily what are the outcomes in the sense of, you don't have to judge what am I going to learn by this step. Rather, what is the outcome going to be in? If I take this step in wisdom, no matter what happens, I still gain wisdom because I'm seeking wisdom. But if I take this step out of pride, then all I'm going to get back is pride. I'm going to look for ways to puff up my pride, because the decision behind your investment, it needs to be tested. It needs to be tested. Why are you taking that step? Why do you want to take that step? Let's make it personal. For me, do I want to be a pastor to have a multi-thousand person church? Do I want to be a pastor so that I can get enough acclaim to write a New York Times best-selling book? Do I want to be a pastor so that I can go speak at all these conferences and do all that? What's the purpose? Because if that's the purpose, that's out of pride. That's out of pride. If the reason why I want to have a church is to only reach, like, let's say 10,000 people, then what's the point of that? Then, I'm reaching 10,000 people, sure, but I'm doing it out of a standpoint of pride. So everything that I teach and everything that I do will be tainted by the source of my decision. And the source of my decision, in this case, would be pride. You have to test what you invest. You have to test what you invest, because if I do all that, let's say I get to a point where the church that I have is 10,000 people. Let's say I get to that point. If I get to that point out of an investment of pride, it all would have been for the wrong reasons. Test what you invest. Test what you invest. I said, I will be wise, but wisdom wise was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? Solomon is saying this, realizing and acknowledging that God is the only person who can find it out. It is that which has been far off is deep, very deep. I thought that once I get there, I would understand the meaning of it, but I realized that what I saw was just the surface. The water I was approaching had depths that I could not imagine. It was far off, and I couldn't understand it because I was far off, but now that I'm there, what was far off? Now that I'm there, I realize the depth of it, and I still can't fully understand it. Who can find it out? God shows a lack of our wisdom, shows a lack of our capability to comprehend. But God is the source of that wisdom. Verse 25 is really the crux of what I'm going to be talking about today. I turned my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom in the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. That is madness. Today I want to talk about investigate. Let's use this marker. I like this marker. Today I'm going to be talking about investigate. And as you guys have already probably picked up on, I think you guys know what word I'm drawing out in investigate. Right? Investigate. Invest. Because in order for you to investigate, or to use Solomon's language, to search out and seek, that's investigate. That's investigating. In order for you to search and to seek, you have to be invested. You can't search and seek after what you are not invested in yourself. If you don't find it, let's relate it back to last week. If you approach it with apathy, then you won't ever find a meaning and a reason to invest yourself. And so when Solomon says, I turned my heart, it's out of intention. It's out of intention. It comes after he has tested all things by wisdom. The test leads to a turn. Man, I'm really Southern Baptist today. I talked about there's a test behind the invest. And also, when you test, it leads to a turn. If I had 2 points today, you could say test, turn, and we'll get to the last one. Test and turn. But for your heart to be turned towards wisdom, you don't turn towards what you're already looking at. that just shows that our natural position of our heart, and our heart is our spirit, which is ironic because symbolically God represents heart throughout the Bible. You can look at it many different ways. A lot of the times it's the Holy Spirit that is our heart. It is God's mind that is our heart. It's God's presence that is our heart. And yet when it finds its way into me, the natural position is away from God. It's away from wisdom, which wisdom is given through God. It's away. And so you have to turn your heart. You have to remember, to look at, to remember wisdom. Because the natural position is for you to turn to foolishness. The natural position is to turn to pride. The natural position is to turn to folly. So we have to turn our heart back to wisdom. In other words, right, we have to turn what is God back to God. There we go. Think about that. Let that mellow. Think about how that applies to yourself. We have to turn what is God back to God. Turn my heart. Search out and seek. Like I said, it's an investment. But not only is it an investment, right? It's intentional, I've gone over that. But it's also impersonal. Wisdom is impersonal. Because if I have to search it out and seek it out, that means that I don't have it to begin with. If Solomon knew that we had wisdom, then he would have said, go to your closet and pick up your wisdom jacket. All right? Maybe these pants, these holy pants. Oh my God, I'm so bad. I'm sorry. I'm really bad. I'm sorry. I promise. I'm not normally this bad. These holy pants, okay? They holy pants. My wisdom, right? Maybe I got my wisdom hat. I got a good amount of hats. You guys can't see them because it's out of the frame. But I got a good amount of hats, man. And some of them look really good too. You know, I got my Philadelphia Eagles hats. I got an Elevation hat. I got a UNC Charlotte hat. I got a golf hat. I got a Miami Heat hat from when I used to be a bandwagon fan of the Heat. I got my Sixers hat because I'm actually a fan of the Sixers. I got my Phillies hat, my Flyers hat, another Eagles hat. I got another Charlotte hat. I got a Pokemon hat, y'all. I got a Pokemon. Don't front. Y'all know you like Pokemon. Alright? And if you don't, you should. And don't judge me because I have a Pokemon hat and I wear it around. Those hats. Let's say that wisdom is those hats, right? Go. If that's what Solomon meant, he would have just said, yo, grab your Pokemon wisdom hat, bruh. But he didn't say that. He said that you gotta search it out, that you gotta seek it out. It's not something you have. It's something that you need to invest yourself in and investigate in order for you to see the outcome of it. And not only does he say that we need to search out and seek wisdom, also look at this in the second half. And to know, right? Not to search out and to seek, but to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. I hate people when they say that I'm only going to hang around Christians. I'm only going to hang around Christians. If you're not Christian, I'm not going to talk to you. If you're not Christian, I'm not going to associate with you. If you're Christian, I'm not going to hang out with you strictly because you're not Christian. I can't stand people who are like that. First of all, look at Jesus. Second of all, look at Paul. And look at what they have to say to us about reaching people who are non-Christian. Check yourself. Also, if you only seek after God then how do you know what isn't God? If the only thing that you ever look for is God, then you innately will draw God out of whatever you look for, regardless of whether or not they are done by good or bad intention. If you never know, right, not seek out or search, if you never know what isn't God, then ultimately you'll fall victim to it because you don't know what it is to look like. So the enemy can dress himself all up and say, ooh, look at me, I'm looking like God today. And then he can lead you down that path. Because if you don't know the way of wickedness and folly, as well as you search out and seek wisdom, if you don't know that what the enemy is trying to do is take you off of the search for wisdom and lead you on a search that will get you nowhere. If you don't realize what draws you away from wisdom, then you're going to be led away from wisdom. And of course, I keep saying wisdom, but wisdom comes from God. Look at Proverbs. First 4 chapters, he explains it all really, really well. Take your time reading it, but he explains it really, really well if you have a question about it. Proverbs 1-4. Solomon is much, much wiser than I. Wisdom, right? When I say wisdom, I really mean God, because wisdom comes from God and only from God. So by seeking wisdom, you're seeking God. So if you are walking on a path towards God without knowledge of what is not God and what can draw you away from God and what can set you apart from God and what can have you take a turn down something that isn't God, if you aren't knowledgeable of that, then I guarantee that you will take that step at some point if you don't do anything to learn about what isn't wisdom. We have to know wickedness as well as we seek wisdom. We have to know, that's what Solomon is trying to say here. Because if we don't know what draws us away, we'll end up falling away regardless of if we want to or not. And the last thing I want to talk about, because investigate is great, right? But, and a lot of people will invest themselves. And a lot of people will investigate. But where I think a lot of people are lacking is they don't move on to the next word. Because investigate is not the final step. Investigate is the first step. Here's the next step. Here's how you put it into action. Activate. Investigate and activate. We can't just invest on what God has shown and what God has given to us. We got to act on it. But in order to activate what God has taught us through our investigation, in order to activate it, we got to act on it. We got to act on it. And God will, and here's how I want to encourage you guys today, because if God has already given it to you through investigation, He intends for you to have activation. All that is separating you from activation and not, the only step that is keeping you in between investigation and activation is act. You have to act on what God has given you. But because God has given it to you through a period of investigation, and He knows that He wants you to get it into activation, all you have to do is act on it. And I might be taking this just a little bit too far. And if I'm taking it too far, then I apologize. But I think that there's a double word in investigate. Investigate. Invest a gate. Investigate. What you invest in and what you investigate will ultimately be the door to what God wants you to activate. Investigate. Invest. The gate. And then act. Evade. Invest. The gate. And activate. I hope that this means something to you. I hope that you maybe have a new perspective on investment, that you maybe have a new perspective on return, that maybe you have a new perspective on activation, or you have a new encouragement on acting on something that God has put on your heart. Because when you act on it is when you'll see the purpose behind it. You might not see the purpose now. You might not see the end result now. You might know that you're heading towards and doing things out of the standpoint, maybe you've tested it and maybe you've turned, but maybe it's time. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time for you. You've tested it, you've turned to it, but now it's time, and the time is now. The step that God has put on your heart, the time is now. God is waiting on your activation, on your act, in order to draw out the return on your investment. God wants to draw out the purpose behind what He has given you, and He's waiting on you to realize that the time is now for you to move onto and into what God wants you to do. The time is now for you to activate what God has put on your heart. And some of you guys, you're watching this and you realize that maybe now by a standpoint of testing your investment, maybe you realize that you've been seeking the wrong thing. Maybe you've been doing it out of the wrong intention. Maybe you look at this and you go, I want this. I want to, when I invest myself in something, I want to have a return on my investment. And I realize that the places that I've been turning to ultimately have led to dissatisfaction, ultimately have led to feelings of inequity. If that's you today and you need to give yourself to God, do it. The time is now. The time is now. If you have any more questions for me, leave them in the comments. Shoot me an email. My email is pastormitchs@gmail.com. If you got any questions, any comments, any concerns, anything you want to talk about further, I'm there. I'm there with that time. But I hope that this has meant something to you. And I hope that there's something that you can draw out of it and move towards in your day-to-day life. Maybe there's a decision that you need to make. Test, turn, and time. Test, turn, and time. Test it. Test your intention. Test the result. Test the outcome. What is it going to be based in? Is it going to be based in pride? Is it going to be based in wisdom? Is it going to be based in foolishness? Know the way of the wicked so that you can turn and seek the way of wisdom and then act. Act on it. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this message, and I hope it's something that's been powerful and meaningful to you guys. I hope that you guys have a great day. I'll see you guys.